Well, good morning. My name is Minister Jammel Davis. Many of you know me already, some of you don't. It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Um, I am teaching on a familiar passage, on a familiar story, but I hope to give you a little bit of a different perspective on it. It's funny. I'm actually really excited about this. When I was given it, I was given the text and the title. I was looking at the like four verses or something like that, and I'm like, man, how I'm gonna fill up 20 minutes with this? And now I'm like, how am I gonna stick to 20 minutes? Because I've been asked to hold this within 20 minutes. I'm gonna do my best to do so while I'm staying true to what the text has here. The title of the lesson I was given from this morning, I was given it is called "Delivered from Fear." Um, for me personally, I would say that this particular title, I think it leaves a little bit to still be desired because I think that so often when we come to this particular um, lesson, this particular story, that we miss the meat of the story. I think that we too often look at the background singers and we don't spend enough time appreciating who's up front in this story. And the person up front in this story is Jesus. The background is disciples. So often we kind of rush to the disciples because we relate to them, because we see how it relates to us. For me, I'm gonna spend a little time first here looking at the star of this particular story, and that is our Lord Jesus. The text is going to be coming from Matthew chapter 8. I'll be reading verses 23 through 27. And what I'm going to be reading from is the New Living Translation. For y'all that know me, I know that I like the New Living Translation. I think it helps make it kind of clear for us. So that's what I'll be reading from this morning. I'm going to go through and read through the text, and then we'll do a little bit discussing. I'm gonna ask again, if you can, if you're not already, please put yourself on mute so we don't hear anything in the background. Uh, Matthew 8, verse 23 to 27 reads like this. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake, the waves breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Now, Jesus responded, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They asked. Even the winds and the waves obey him. For me, if there was a key verse of this text, I think that verse 27 is the key verse of this text. Is who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him? So I'm going to talk a little bit about who is this man. This man, Jesus, the God man, the Son of God, Jesus. Let me give you a little context of where this story is coming from this morning. Um, this story is actually found in both Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All give very similar accounts, emphasizing slightly different things. But this morning, we're coming from the book of Matthew, and this passage comes from chapter 8, which follows 5 through 7, which, if you're familiar, is the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew has a particular way in which he is presenting the gospel as he writes this. He's writing this with the intention of Jewish audience, and Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and what Matthew follows through, he's talking about the kingdom of God. A lot of us talked about the kingdom. Jesus talks a lot about this new kingdom, and he's mentioning Jesus is proclaiming without saying it, without saying it verbatim. Or should I say, without saying it outright, that there's this new kingdom and he is the king. He's proclaiming his kingship over it, and the miracles and things that he is performing is a demonstration of the kingship of Jesus over this new kingdom. Um, so again, so this follows right after the Sermon on the Mount. chapters 5 through 7. And if you look at, then we get to chapter 8, where this story is contained. And there's a couple stories within chapter 8 that come before and actually after it um, that relates. It's really important for us to understand. Early in this chapter, and we'll look at it in more detail, this particular one, but right before this, later, we'll look in more detail later, but right before this, in the beginning of chapter 8, Jesus heals a man with leprosy. So that's the first thing that happens in this chapter. So he performs this miracle of healing a man with leprosy, and he heals many others as well. Jesus heals a sick man from a distance.
Yeah.
There's the Roman centurion who Jesus says that I tell you the truth, that nobody, he hasn't seen faith like this in all of Israel, because the Roman centurion believes and says with
Mhm.
faith that if you just speak it from a distance, he doesn't even ask Jesus to come to his house. He says he's not worthy. That if you just speak it with a distance, he knows that his servant will be healed, and the man is healed.
Mhm.
After that, Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. Um, and then after that, he cast out many demons. They bring all these people to him. Jesus cast out demons and he's healing the sick. And it's right in that area there that he says, he tells them, let's go across the other side of the lake. Let's get in the boat, let's go across the other side of the lake. When Luke tells the story, it's found right in the same story about when Jesus says, let's go to the other side of the lake. Matthew, there's a little bit of a distance between when he says it and the particular verses that we're honing in on this morning. But again, this is also important. And then it's also important for us to realize that they're going to the other side of the lake. So they're going somewhere, and where they're going, Jesus has, um, those who are on this boat don't know it, but Jesus has plans for what happens when he gets to the other side of the lake. Because as soon as he gets to the other side of the lake, Jesus cast out demons of a man who is possessed with many demons and is under a lot of. They're saying he's being tormented, and we'll get into that a little further. Um, but again, what I think when we look at this story too often, we jump to make this about the disciples. In extension, we jump to make it about us. I know that it's important that we find this word and figure out how it applies to us, but sometimes we got to sit and look at what it's saying about God. And we got to look at, I think Matthew, when he writes this, again, I'm trying to give him this context because he's talking about the kingship, and Jesus is doing these things and demonstrating his kingship or his rulership and his dominion. And what we find in this story is another example of Jesus showing just how powerful he is, of Jesus showing what is actually under his dominion, what is actually what has to answer to him. Things that look big to us are simple and small to him. And so the first point that I want us to look at this morning is that Jesus is in control. It's simple, it's short, but it's really, really important that we get it. Jesus is in control. And Jesus being in control is how one of the things that he demonstrates that he's in control is that he makes what looks insurmountable to us, Jesus makes it look small and insignificant. And he does that a few times in this chapter. Um, First, he does it with sickness. We we can get high and mighty, and we can get to feeling like things are going real well, and we got our stuff together, and you might have a little money in the bank, and you got influence, and you got people who answer to you, but uh, you're not more powerful than the sickness. I think of this one story I think about in particular is the story of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is the man who was one of the co-founders of Apple, and really was the one that led them to the incredible success that they're still benefiting off of his work. That man was the brainchild, the one who created the iPhone and the iPod before that. And he did all of these different things and led Apple so well and amassed so much money. And the people that were close to him said that this man got power hungry. He kind of got drunk with his own power, and he was, a person that bossed people around and was not nice, and kind of felt like he could do what he wanted to. And Life has a way of humbling even the greatest, or people who appear the greatest like that, because all that money he had, all that power he had, couldn't save him from dying of cancer. Now, don't misconstrue what I'm saying, because I'm not saying that cancer was a result of what he did or his attitude, or I'm not saying that. It's just an example of the fact that no matter how big, no matter how powerful you are, you're not greater. You can't overcome sickness, even the most rich and powerful in the world. But Jesus does so very simply, and we see it here. In the beginning of the chapter, we see it with leprosy. And when he does so, the man asks him, "Are you willing?" And this is looking at chapter 8, verse 2. The man asks him, he says, "If you're willing, I know you can heal me and make me clean." And Jesus says, "I'm willing to be healed." That was all that he had to do. And then it says that the leprosy just disappeared. So here's a sickness that was considered one of the strongest and worst, and probably the worst things that you could have, because it was painful and it was slow, and it meant that you couldn't be with your family, you couldn't live in the town. And something as significant as that, Jesus makes look small by just saying, "I'm willing, be healed." Simple, very, very simple. We see it here where the way that Jesus makes the sea and the weather even responds to him, as it says in that key verse there. I remember I did a sermon last year before we were scattered, when we were still together. I did a sermon, and one of the things that I looked at was Revelation 21. And I was curious, because God says that when he creates a new earth and the new heaven, new earth, he says it's going to be a place with no seas. And so I did a little digging and was curious to find, like, why does God say there's going to be a place with no sea? Because particularly in this time, the way that they viewed the sea was considered a place of Hades, right? The bottom of the sea was considered almost like hell. It was a place of chaos. It was a place uncontrollable. It was a place that, and even today, it's a place where no matter how strong and how strong and powerful we are, water is a place that actually we're pretty vulnerable in. I bet you I'm talking to a few people. You don't have to call yourself out. But I bet I'm talking to a few people on here that don't know how to swim. And so for you, when you get in the water, you feel really vulnerable. And even the greatest swimmer, if you drop him in the middle of that ocean, you drop Michael Phelps in the middle of the ocean, he's going to swim for a while. He's going to swim longer than many of us. But he too is going to drown, because the sea, the water, is something that is so big and so large and powerful to us. It's a place that we are completely vulnerable. You look at the story. I remember the movie Titanic came out when I was in fourth grade, and that was just the biggest thing in America, and everybody was talking about the Titanic. And I remember reading the story, and I was like, man, they sound like they asked for this, because one of the engineers said, this is a boat that even God himself can't sink. And I remember reading that as a kid in fourth grade, thinking like, wow, that's a bold statement, because even this great ship like the Titanic is vulnerable on the sea. The sea was the water in the sea is a place that is big and powerful and can be chaotic. And yet Jesus makes it look small. We know that he walks on the water later, but in this particular story, he simply gets up and he commands the waves to be quiet, the winds and the waves to be quiet, and they're calm. Very, very simply. So Jesus, again, we see an example of Jesus showing that which is big and powerful, seeming to us, is small to him. He demonstrates his power over nature, because it's the wind, it's the water, it's all of that. As powerful as you think you might are, you're not more powerful or powerful or strong or whatever self-sufficient you might think you are. You're not more powerful than an earthquake or a hurricane or a tornado. I'll tell you what, to me, one of the things that make me realize God is real more than anything is lightning. It was thundering and lightning pretty badly up here. just yesterday morning, I remember I'm from Florida, where man, that happens real regularly. But I remember I was living here, and I remember my wife and I were uh, we were asleep in the bed, and man, lightning hit a tree near our house, and I remember like feeling the electricity in the air, and I remember feeling like thinking the awesomeness of the power of God. That's something that's in his control and is small to him of lightning is terrifying to me. It didn't hit me. It didn't do anything to me. But just to be near the presence of something so powerful was just it just all it was I was awestruck by the power of that. Here Jesus shows that this storm, nature is nothing to him. And in the same chapter as well, Jesus demonstrates his power over the devil. We see that in a few ways. We see that where um, again, I told you that earlier in chapter 8, you look at like verse 16, it says that many demon possessed people were brought to Jesus and he cast out evil spirits. And it says here in the New Living Translation, and I think it's important, it says, he cast out the evil spirits with a simple command. Jesus didn't do no wrestling. He didn't have to do a big rain dance. He didn't have to do a whole lot of talking and praying. He's so powerful. It's a simple command. He cast out the devil. He cast out demons with. If you spend more time later on after this particular passage that we're looking at, and you go in chapter 8, verses 28 through, I think it's through the end of the chapter. Yeah, he goes. So where they're heading when they're on the Sea of Galilee, where they're heading to, he goes and casts out many demons. I believe it's in the Luke. You gotta forgive me. I think it's in the Luke version of this story that when he asked the name of the demons, they said it's legion because we are many. But each Mark, Luke, and Matthew, each account of this talk about how the demons were so powerful within this man um, that people couldn't. They were living in tombs. He was living in a tomb. People couldn't come close to him because he was violent, and that they had tried to shackle him many times. And he was so strong that he would break the chains. And it says that he couldn't subdue him. The people couldn't subdue him. Jesus shows up, and as soon as Jesus shows up, they're scared. As soon as he shows up, and they're like, man, please don't cast us into the bottomless pit. Jesus makes even the demons and look small. And there's some belief with commentators, and I happen to believe that this storm that they encounter on the Sea of Galilee is one that is likely supernatural. If you know that 4 of the disciples were fishermen who fished here often, and the storms and stuff were common, but the way that we see them responding in this story is not that it's common. They believe they're gonna die. So it makes us maybe think that this is more to it than just some normal storm. Plus, it seems that this storm is trying to keep them from doing something. And what we see is done next is the demon is cast out. The demons are cast out of this man. And so there are commentators, and I happen to believe that, this storm is the work of the devil. I'm not going to take you there right now, but if you get some extra time, go look at Romans 8, one of my favorite passages. And it says that even the earth is under a curse. So the earth is like us in our flesh, um, waiting to be redeemed fully from what we're placed under from the result of sin. And so, and this is a side note, and I won't spend long here, but I think often what we do sometimes with the devil, He's either made to be just a cartoon and has red horns and talks to you on your shoulder, and he's made to be real small. Or on the other hand, people think of the devil and try to make him out to be a rival to God, that there's some actual battle and he's almost as powerful as God. The devil is real. The devil is very powerful and more powerful than any of us. And yet we see to Jesus, he's made to look small. To God, to Jesus, he's made to be small and insignificant. And so my point with all of this is that I'm just trying to point to like Jesus, we see to the level Jesus is in control because Jesus makes what is insurmountable. Jesus makes what seems so big, small. In none of these stories, if you get the time to go back, you're not going to see any of these stories where Jesus is having a wrestle. He's not wrestling with nobody like Jacob did, or he's not. It's very simple commands he shows with his simple words that he's stronger and more powerful than sickness. He's stronger and more powerful than the sea. He's stronger and more powerful than nature. He's stronger and more powerful than the devil. And this is why we can trust and know that he is in control because he's God. He demonstrates through this that he is God. And the thing is, it's important for us when we understand who God is properly, we start to understand what isn't God. I'm going to say that again, make sure you get it. When we start to really get a good grasp of understanding of who God is, we get a clear understanding of what isn't God. What isn't God? The things I listed in this already. What also isn't God is the president, the police, COVID, all of these things that we've experienced in some way that are big and powerful forces that we've experienced in the last year and a half, but we see God is bigger than all of them. And in your life, God is bigger than that boss. And you might have a boss out there that is just tormenting you, that's giving you a hard time. God is bigger than your boss. Jesus is bigger than all of those circumstances. And because he's bigger than all of that, it gives us assurance in knowing that he's in control. There's nothing that he does not have control over. So I wanted to stop there. I mean, I wanted to go there and spend some time talking about Jesus and who he is. And lastly, my second point, I'll try to wrap it up, is that Jesus, we didn't realize that Jesus, so the first one is to know that Jesus is in control. The second is to know that Jesus is willing and able. Willing and able. It's important that you get both of them because one or the other isn't enough. And this is a lesson that somehow the disciples didn't learn from earlier. If you look in, if you can go with me, if you have your Bibles open, at Matthew 8:2, that leper I talked about earlier. The leper shows up. I'm going to read verse 2. New Living Translation says, suddenly a man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him. Lord, said the man, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. So the leper comes to Jesus, calling him Lord, and comes there knowing that he is able. He has faith in Jesus, that Jesus is bigger than his leprosy. So he believes that he is able. The question that he asked Jesus, or what is that, if you are willing. And what we find is that Jesus reached out and touched the man and says, I am willing. So this is something that the disciples were there and they were witnesses of, that they didn't catch on to this lesson, that Jesus is stronger than these things, he's bigger than these things, but he's also willing. It's not one or the other, it's both. The Roman centurion, also in this same chapter earlier, when he comes to him, he says, Jesus, I know you can heal with just a word. So he knows that Jesus is able. He believes, he has faith. And that's why Jesus makes a great proclamation about this man's faith, because he says, I know that you're able. He believes that he is able with just a word. So it's important in knowing who God is, knowing that he is able. And he comes to him because that Roman man believes Jesus is willing. The same dialogue's not there, but he comes to him. And I believe that's the reason why Jesus um, gives him this great endorsement is because he believes Jesus is willing. That's why he comes to him. Now coming back to our story here, again, in the story of this storm, the disciples are in the middle of this storm that I believe is supernaturally motivated, supernaturally controlled, and this like something they've never seen, and they believe that, man, this is it. They believe they're gonna die. In all three accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they say something along the lines of we're gonna die, we're gonna drown, something like that. They believe that they out of there. Um, I would say I give them some credit because they displayed some faith coming to Jesus, right? When they come to him, they know this is going on. I don't know. We don't know how long this storm is going on while Jesus is asleep. But at some point, it dawns on them. We got who we need right here to talk to. So they go to him. And so they did display some matter of faith. And I think for us, let's not be too hard on them. Give them some credit for knowing who to come to. Jesus rebukes them by telling them they have so little faith and asking them why they're afraid. But I wonder what Jesus' words would have been if they came to him and said, "Hey, Jesus, grab a bucket. We got water coming over this boat. Help us, Jesus, help us with that sail over there, or grab this oar." That's not what they do. I think Jesus' words might have been a little bit harsher to them if that's the approach they took. Nah, they came to him saying like, "Hey, we know that this guy, we've watched what he's done, and we know that there's something to it. We've seen him do some amazing things, and so this isn't what we're gonna go to." I think Jesus does say, ask them why they're afraid and why they have so little faith. And I think that's something to do with one or the other. And I don't know exactly what it was, but I think there's some doubt in knowing if he's willing or if he's able. Like, yeah, we've seen him do some things before, but this is a bigger beast in some ways, right? We've seen, other people have been healed in the Bible before. That wasn't the first person to be healed of leprosy. Right? We've seen some of these other things happen before, but just calming a storm is not something that we've seen. It's not something that they've seen, that they know of. So just trying to give them a little bit of making it a little easier on there, so we're not so hard on them. They come to him knowing that this is the guy to come to, but there's some level of doubt between knowing if he is willing or if he is able. Now, for us knowing that God is willing and able, it's important that we know his character and we know his word, right? So on the willing, if you're a disciple sitting there or wherever you're in, one, you've seen what he's done for these other people who he doesn't have a relationship with like that. So we know his character is loving, his character is, he's willing, right? Now, knowing if he is able or not, we see that Jesus demonstrates to them that he is able. But the thing is that if they had looked at his word, if they had remembered his word, then they would have known, they would have had more faith, right? Because that's what I said, we go back to. In verse 18 of this chapter, Jesus says, it says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross to the other side of the lake. In Luke's version of the story, it starts off with the storm saying, Jesus says, let's go to the other side. So God's word was that we're going to the other side. This wasn't a dinner cruise, right? You might have taken a dinner cruise before where you go out and you sail around in circles, where you ain't got nowhere to go. You just out there trying to enjoy the scenery and stuff, right? You ain't got no destination, and you plan to go right back wherever you started. That's where your car is at. That's where your transportation is at. But this ain't no dinner cruise. Jesus ain't say we're gonna go out there and sail and just have a good time. They're on a journey. They are going somewhere. So he's telling them we going to the other side. See, if they had remembered his word, they would have known that man, we're gonna make it. They would have been able to have faith in knowing that he's willing and he's able, because if God tells us he's gonna do something, he's gonna do it. If God gives you something in your life, if he's giving you a word of a journey of where he is sending you, then you have to keep the faith in knowing that he's gonna get you there. Even when things come in the way that look like obstacles, even when things don't look like you think they should. But if he has told you that, if that is his word, then he's going to get you to where he says he's going to get you to. And see, that's what they miss, is that if they had paid attention, and we gotta give them give them a break. They're in the middle of the chaos. They're in the middle of it all. And sometimes we do the same thing. But when you get like that, you need to go back and remind yourself of who God is, who his character is, and what he has said. Because those are two things you can always rely on. Those are two things you can always trust in. That of God's character, because he's unchanging, and of his word, what he's told you. I can tell you, man, a few years ago, God told me to pack up and move to Dallas, living in Washington, D.C. And I didn't know how I was going to get here. He told me to come to seminary. He told me to do this. And by his grace, man, there's been a whole lot of stuff that came in, obstacles that came in my way, a whole lot of things. And I can't sit here and say I ain't never have doubt. I had doubt plenty of times. But you know what? God said it. He said he was taking me somewhere and he was going to bring me there. And he made sure to safely see me there. And he'll do the same thing for you in your life. You see, when we lose faith in God's character and his word, that's where fear naturally creeps in. Faith and fear are like oil and water. They don't really mix. They can be there side by side, but they're not going to mix. And wherever that faith leaves, it's like a vacuum. Wherever that faith leaves, fear is just waiting to take that same spot. That's how we have to work to keep our faith. We have to remind ourselves of the character of God, and we have to remind ourselves of the word of God. And when we do that, that is the foundation where our faith stays. But we got this flesh. We got this thing that we're going to deal with for the rest of our lives until God calls us home and he comes back. And anytime that faith leaves us and that faith decreases, that fear is going to increase. I know many of us have experienced a lot in this last year and a half. And those are some every time. If you get more faith, you're going to have less fear about COVID. Not that you weren't cautious, not that you didn't wear your mask, you didn't distance. I ain't saying that. But where that faith increased, that fear decreased. But what you'll find, I believe you probably know from this last year and a half, and if you want, you'll figure out. Whenever that fear increases, that's the result of the faith that's decreased. Because fear is always trying to take that space of faith. It's like they got that. It's like a room in our heart for one of the two, and they jostling for that. They fighting for that same spot. When the faith increases, the fear will decrease. When the faith decreases, the fear will increase. So that's my lesson for today. About this story, and I think that again, I said a lot in there, but it all summarizes to two main points. I think everything should have supported that. Is that one, Jesus is in control. Knowing Jesus is in control and believing Jesus is in control is believing he's God. That's what this book demonstrates, and I bet you, if you've been walking with him for long enough, he has demonstrated it in your life that he's in control. And the second point is that Jesus is willing and able. Those things are twins that go together. You need both. You need to know that he's willing and able. Before I close, I had something I forgot I wanted to share about that point, is that just to help make that a little clear, willing and able, right? I'm like many millennials, right? I got some student loan debt. Like I'm like many millennials. I got student loan debt. There's a bunch of billionaires, millionaires out there, right? I'm gonna just pick one. Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon. He is able. I have no doubt in my mind. He is able to clear my debt. That if he wants to, he could take that debt away. I have no doubt about that. I got a lot of faith that he is able to do it. Now, is he willing? The answer probably is no, because he's known to be a little bit be a greedy person. That's another story. But he don't know me. He don't have no investment in me, and I don't blame him. He don't owe me anything, right? He's able, but he is willing. Then there's somebody, my mother will say, my mother might be willing. My mother might, be willing and want to do that for me. But, means aren't available for her to be able to do so. And that's why it's so important that we understand Jesus is both. Jesus has both. And it takes both. That he is both willing and he's able. And a lot of times where our doubt creeps in, where that fear creeps in, is most of the time it's not both of those things that we doubt God in, but we doubt God in one or the other. And that's where the doubt and the fear creeps in. So again, my lesson for this morning is just number one, that Jesus is in control. And number two, that Jesus is willing and able. So that's the end of my lesson. We can stop there, and then I got a few questions prepared and that we can discuss a little further.